Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar for the Migration in Harmony Research Coordination Network. My name is Victoria Herman. I'm the Managing Director of the Arctic Institute and one of the principal investigators of this migrations network that brings together people from across the world to look at how the Arctic is moving. We have economists, social scientists, traditional knowledge holders, fishermen, teachers, students together in this network of almost 450 members. And we get together on virtual calls like this, but also hopefully in person in the not too distant future to build coalitions for effective policymaking, research, and collaborations in Arctic migrations. And today we have an awesome speaker, my good friend, Brett Veerhusen, who is a steering committee member of the Migration in Harmony Research Coordination Network. And Brett is the founder of Ocean Strategies, where he works to build coalitions and support a wide variety of ocean-related projects, nonprofits, and for-profits. And he has worked with some of the most influential seafood and maritime initiatives over this past decade. And I can attest to that through working together here in DC before he headed back home on the West Coast. Prior to working at Ocean Strategies, Brett was the executive director of the Seafood Harvesters of America, where he built the go-to fishermen's organization in the capital of the United States. Brett's been featured in the New York Times, in the Arctic Institute, Forbes, and has written for The Hill. And today you are going to hear about the importance of coalitions. You are going to hear about two examples of that in Bristol Bay and during the COVID-19 pandemic, what goes right, what goes wrong, and how you can build your own coalitions. A few housekeeping notes. I will be monitoring the chat. If you have any questions during this webinar, please type them in the chat and I will make sure that Brett gets them throughout the webinar before we open up for a question and answer session where I will invite you to ask Brett your own questions on camera or if you are calling in on your phone. If you have any logistical questions, please also put them in the chat and I will be answering them. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Brett.
Thanks, Victoria. Can you hear me well? You hear me okay? Great. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. It's really, we were, before the call, Victoria and I were adding it up. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago where we met in Norway. And so time goes by fast and it's really great to still be working with you, Dr. Herman, and I really want to thank the Dr. Herman now. Congratulations. And I'd really like to thank the Arctic Institute, Migrations in Harmony, National Sciences Foundation for helping make all of this possible, and thank especially everybody today who is in front of me and us virtually across the world for taking the time out of your busy schedules, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. I really appreciate you allowing me to give some ideas and about coalition building, and I really appreciate your time. Like Victoria said, my name is Brett Veerhusen. I am the principal of Ocean Strategies. I'm going to share my screen throughout this presentation, hopefully make it a pretty interactive. Some things may not work, some things may with the advances of technology. So please give me a wave or put something in the chat and we'll make it as interactive as possible if things, just aren't quite working. So let me just share my screen and we'll kind of get started here. So like Victoria said, today we are going to talk about advocacy coalitions. This is something I have a lot of experience in and also learning a lot about, especially as we move through this modern era of COVID-19. So we're going to discuss advocacy coalitions and through the lens of pandemics and what the Pebble mine can teach us. You can contact me with my email listed below, or we can put anything in the chat as well, and be happy to be in touch. So the format of today is that we're going to kind of hopefully have a goal for everybody here to have a little bit better understanding of the fabric of coalitions and coalition management. We're going to use these two examples, COVID-19 and the proposed Pebble mine, to shed some light on effective coalitions and also how coalitions can have a difficult time advancing through political climates. I'll be able to present some academic information first, and then really dive in on some boots on the ground, boots on the deck resources, so that hopefully this audience can apply and learn. And welcome to contact me or Victoria with any questions going forward. Like Dr. Herman said, my expertise is within seafood and the really complex components of our seafood supply chain. I grew up commercial fishing out of a small Aleut village on the Alaska Peninsula called Chignik, and then spent most of my time commercial fishing in the summers throughout my 20s and 30s, running a fishing boat in Bristol Bay, Alaska, as well as fishing with my family out in Dutch Harbor, which for all you Arctic maritime nerds like myself, the Unimac Pass, which is the main thoroughfare for shipping transportation to and from Asia and the United States. That is Unimac Pass is where I actually spent a lot of my time chasing herring, and I'm very familiar with that Arctic transportation route. So definitely have a lot of appreciation for the shipping and transportation sector. Today, we're going to really be focusing on seafood, and we're going to go through the Advocacy Coalition framework by Paul Sabatier and other scholars who have expanded upon it, and then move through those two examples. So without further ado, thank you for your time, and I will attempt to use technology and have it work. We will move through. So I think it's just first to define our issues today. Like I mentioned, Paul Sabatier, the late Paul Sabatier, passed away, but his research on coalitions and advocacy coalitions and developing the advocacy coalition framework, I found to be really helpful in guiding the little bit of research I've done on using the ACF model to look at especially the Pebble mine issue, but also helps to define, really how coalitions can form and what the structures and functions of them are. So we'll go briefly through them today, but I encourage anybody who has interest in this to really look up the ACF framework. So first, a definition. An advocacy coalition contains people from a variety of positions, elected and agency officials, could be interest group leaders or researchers, who share a particular belief system. So basically a set of basic values, casual assumptions, and problem perceptions, and who show a non-trivial degree of coordinated activity over time. As I would like to put it, a coalition is oftentimes a bunch of disparate people or groups or entities who come together on a like-minded issue. And it's really important, in my experience, that a coalition, especially if it is a coalition of sometimes disparate folks, really focus and define what the parameters are of what you are working on and what you are working towards. Just because oftentimes biases and other agendas can creep in, and really you just don't want that coalition to have mission creep. Sabatier, he also has developed this advocacy coalition framework, which focuses on the interaction between competing coalitions within a policy subsystem, which I'll talk about in a moment, which in turn operates within a wider political system and external environment. And so the two examples today that we're going to run through, the COVID-19 pandemic, really follows Sabatier's ACF under a cooperative policy subsystem, while the Pebble mine issue really falls below the adversarial policy subsystem. So just some notes for folks who may want to continue to research on those topics. That's also, one is relevancy on both issues, and two, they neatly pack within the ACF on cooperating and adversarial policy subsystems. This is a model that looks at ACF framework with kind of environmental flow issues, so kind of broader environmental issues. And you can kind of see that you oftentimes have two different coalitions, either competing and more often competing. And this is where we're going to talk about in a minute of how the differences of each of these components that you're seeing really can affect the outcome and how data and information is used. So under a kind of cooperative system, which we'll start talking about first through the COVID-19 pandemic, you can see that science is used to inform different coalitions. There's learning that goes on how that science could affect policy and agenda. And then you have a stream of precipitating events followed by the learnings combined towards an agenda, and then that is normally brokered by somebody or some entity or an elected official to then move towards actual change. I've found that this framework, this kind of simplistic framework, is helpful to understand the basics of advocacy coalitions, but I think it's also really important to understand that each of these components, especially science and how it affects policy learning, can really be used in a way that is combative, or it can be used as a way that is cooperative. And those two we'll see in our next couple of examples. I'm going to share a different screen here, so bear with me. So on the first example, using kind of that framework that we talked about with Paul Sabatier, is on the cooperative, where it's not an adversarial policy subsystem. So I'm going to kind of show a variety of headlines just for time, and so we don't want to lose people, but this will kind of walk through two different varieties of coalitions that we've seen in Alaska, really comprised of the seafood sector. But I think that, and I'd be very interested to learn and have a dialogue today or after from folks tuning in from other countries, how your seafood sector has had to adjust to maintain healthy people and communities. I think that would be very interesting sometimes, and especially right now with during the pandemic. I feel like it's pretty hard sometimes to get out of our own kind of echo chamber, and we're so heads deep, it's sometimes hard to come up for air. So it is very interesting to know what's going on elsewhere in the world. But this is what we faced. Looking at this first headline here in the Times, when was this? It was in May 14th. So exactly 2 months in the United States after, basically COVID started to really take place. And we basically in the seafood industry realized that, especially in Alaska, where over half the United States seafood is harvested and processed, we have such a migratory population who come to Alaska both to fish and to process. And working in very small confines of processing plants and fishing boats, we knew that it was going to be, frankly, what we felt like an insurmountable task. And I say the word "we" to define really what I'm part of and what that coalition has consisted of, because on this particular issue, we had two coalitions, I would say, just like in the framework I showed before. The first is the seafood industry, who want to make this happen. And the second is government and other entities that are informing government, because we had a common issue, and that common issue is COVID-19, and still continues to be. And so what we did in the seafood industry, and I'm speaking, it's been an amazing example of, oftentimes, within the seafood industry, just like many other industries, where politics can get a little ugly, but on COVID, it was, it was the great equalizer. We had commercial fishermen working with processors, working with everybody in the seafood industry to come together and really tackle this problem of how are we going to have thousands headed to our fishing towns, as well as the virus. And what we did is, just like most coalitions, it takes an extraordinary amount of coordination and time to make sure that everybody is receiving the same information and is working towards that common goal. And we worked with some of the leading healthcare experts in Seattle, especially from Discovery Health. I encourage everybody to go to discoveryhealthmd.com to learn more about what this company is doing to provide health and safety guidelines for the maritime and seafood industry in the United States. They have just been Dr. Ann Jarvis has been an amazing resource for us. So that's a plug for them. But what we produced as a coalition within the seafood industry was guidelines that we felt like we could work with. We listened and understood science, talked about it, and coordinated with each other to then help draft with leading healthcare experts what you're looking at on your screen, which are different procedures. And you can see all these different draft numbers, V1.9. I mean, we were changing them as the pandemic has evolved as well. But this was a piece of work that I'm very proud of, helping to lead the coalition of folks. I mean, this is early March and April when we felt like the world was just completely caving in on us. We had thousands of people coming to Alaska, and we were just we were just looking down the barrel of a gun and felt like we had to put everything aside and listen to the science and just work together. And I will say with confidence that I've never seen the industry come together in Alaska the way we have in COVID-19. It's been truly remarkable, and it's been an honor to work with my colleagues in the industry, perhaps some of you on the webinar today. And so these procedures and what you're looking at that Discovery Health hosts really informed both coalitions. They informed the government on how they could mandate law for our industry to keep each other and communities safe through the pandemic, but it also was informed by our seafood coalition that was saying to the government, look, this is what we can do under the confines. If we are going to make our industry happen, if we are going to go fishing this summer, if we are going to provide food for the nation and for the world during this pandemic, under the confines of what we're working at as essential infrastructure, this is what we can do. And that coming together and using science to inform the policy and have policy learning brought our coalitions together in a cooperative way. We weren't using science as and I hate to say it, but I think we can all think of examples where you have one side saying, look at our science, and another side saying, look at our science, and nobody can see eye to eye. Sometimes, different versions of science can be used in an adversarial, combative way. But in this case, in Alaska, in our seafood industry, both sides, both coalitions were able to come together with policy learning and broker those guidelines into law. That is something that both the industry can agree on and support, as well as the government and the state government in Alaska. And so, what did we get? Here's May. This is what we're staring at. Thousands coming. Tens of thousands of people coming to Alaska. This is what we produced as a coalition, guidelines to keep our communities safe and healthy. United Fishermen of Alaska, which is the statewide trade organization, was sort of the go-to entity that kept everybody informed using all the same information. This is where everybody could always have the most up-to-date safety guideline standards and updates from the state and from the industry. And this is July 22nd. I think this is a really accurate headline. Things changed, things have changed in a week. And we'll talk about that in a second. Alaska fishing communities feared COVID-19 contagion from industry. It has not shown up. Tens of thousands of people flew to Alaska, flew to remote communities. And yes, there were outbreaks, and there are outbreaks right now, which I'll talk about in a second. And not everything has been perfect, but the industry has really tried alongside government and communities. We have really worked hard. I can speak probably from a lot of my colleagues. We have never worked so hard in our life during a pandemic, but times like this is when people need representation, and people need experts to follow the most up-to-date guidelines and issues happening, because this pandemic is evolving fast, as is policy in response and recovery. So in a way, this was very good news. I think we will, as an industry, we will always say we are striving to do better, especially as it relates to people's health and safety. But the idea was never to have cases. That was not possible. But the idea was, if you do have cases, test them or quarantine them so that those cases are isolated. We just could not ever have a function where thousands of fishermen and process workers are going into a remote Alaskan community and spreading the virus, where they may have hospital capacity with 1 or 2 ICUs, or they may have none. We could not take that risk. And so we had strict protocols that were very expensive and time consuming and taxing to develop in 3 months, but the industry really pulled through. Except what has happened, so this is July 24th. Seafood companies kept COVID-19 from infecting Alaskans. Now they're trying to keep the virus out of their plants. And this is unfortunately what we are seeing today, is a new issue, which is actually the migratory workforce going to Alaska. We've been able to, kind of keep people under quarantine and kind of locked down. But there's actually, since the infection rate in the state and the statewide population is increasing, those local workers are now contracting the virus outside of work and bringing it into the plant. So it's not the folks who we initially worked really hard on the migratory population side, this coalition, but it's actually the local workforce. And this is an issue that we are dealing with right now, and we are doing our best to keep everybody safe and to keep, fishermen fishing for food security. I'm gonna just pause there. I think I've thrown a lot of information out, and this is kind of one half of the webinar. I wanted to just sort of have everybody kind of reflect on this graphic that we had up before, is really on just using that quick example of this ACF framework. You can see these 2 coalitions coming together around a precipitating event. Goes without saying what that is, but using science to inform ourselves and then broker that policy together through the entire process. And so it's been a learning experience. I'll tell you, it's been hard. It's been gratifying to keep people like my family fishing, and to be trying to keep people safe and healthy. It has not been perfect, but it's been for me a example of coalition and coalition management that has taken so much work and effort from everybody, but because of this common goal, I would say that we have done the best we possibly can. So next, I'm going to go into another example, one that's near and dear to my heart as well, which is when we have adversarial coalitions. And I worked on one side of that coalition and still do, and that is the issue of the proposed Pebble mine in Bristol Bay, Alaska. I'm going to show, again, kind of walk through some visuals. I'm a visual learner, especially from Alaska. It's really lovely to see my state. So I hope it works. Victoria, I am going to try and show a video clip to get started. I don't know if sound can, we'll go through on the screen share, but we'll give it a go. If not, I think there'll be plenty more that we can go through. But what I want folks on for the remaining time that we have together on this webinar is to think about the differences. And the differences between kind of the example I just described of coming together on science and tackling a common problem and putting differences aside, to another issue where you have opposing coalitions, folks who are against a proposed gold and copper mine in Alaska, and then you have folks who are proponents of that mine. And I will really talk about those who are against the proposed Pebble mine, having worked on that coalition for over a decade. So I'm going to walk through now a couple more. Let's see here if I get the right. Thank you for everybody's patience. Let's see. So I want to show a 2-minute video clip. This is also relevant. Mark Titus, the producer of this film called The Wild, is a good friend of mine. It is having its world premiere this month, streaming worldwide. It's a great film, and it helps to educate folks on the issue in Alaska on Pebble Mine. And I think it just, instead of me talking at you, I often think it's better if I could just show you. So why don't we see if this will work? Maybe you can give me a thumbs up if it is, and the video and audio are coming through. All right, well, that didn't work. I tried to be fancy there, but I don't think the audio came through. Is that right, Victoria? Okay, well, we gave it a shot. Let me just close this. And this is just another, let me pull this up here. Sorry, everybody, and thank you for your patience. We tried to show that trailer. I really encourage everybody to go visit The Wild and watch that 2-minute trailer, just to give you an example and a visual example of this very complex issue of multiple coalitions. But this headline gives a couple of nice visuals as well. And what I want to talk about is kind of two factors here. First, what the proposed Pebble mine is in Bristol Bay, Alaska, and what it threatens. And then second, these two different coalitions, and sort of like a coalition within a coalition, and how we've kind of advanced through the policy process, and then also had a lot of that hard work turned around. And I think through that example, we can sort of compare and contrast the differences of all the great and hard work the industry, has done on COVID, working cooperatively with other policymakers, and then kind of the difficulty we have with the proposed Pebble mine issue. So first, the proposed Pebble mine is a proposed copper and gold mine at the headwaters of the world's largest salmon fishery. About 50% of all the sockeye salmon in the world come from this one perfectly intact ecosystem. Also buried underground is a $500 billion worth of gold, copper, and molybdenum, very low grade. And in order to extract those minerals through the chemical process, there'll be roughly about 10 billion tons of toxic waste stored in perpetuity at the headwaters of the world's largest salmon fishery. This is an issue that's extremely complex, and we're not going to have time to run through all the issues, but what this campaign has produced is a similar coalition that you saw and we talked about through the COVID-19 pandemic and creating safety guidelines to keep communities safe and our industry safe. But it has also, I'm just reading chats here, but it has also produced that same seafood industry coming together with a lot of other industries to oppose this project. And we came basically through the entire Obama administration working together to get 95% down the goal line of helping to protect this perfectly intact ecosystem, a subsistence and native way of life that has depended upon this resource for millennia, a commercial fishing industry that provides $1.5 billion in economic output and 14,000 jobs, and really helping secure food security for this nation and for the country at no better time during a pandemic as well, to have a steady supply of salmon reaching your dinner plates. So we got 95% down the goal line, this unique coalition, and we'll go through a couple of examples. And unfortunately, what has happened is, and I'm just gonna unshare here. Despite having one side of the coalition coming together around a common issue on science, informing our common goal of protecting Bristol Bay, another coalition of mining proponents and other natural resource extraction proponents were using science in a different manner. And though that science really has been forming the policy agenda not in our favor. And that coalition work that brought us 95% down the goal line in the Obama administration came to a screaming halt during the Trump administration. So what my point is, and I'm going to share the framework again, is despite having, and this is what I was alluding to before, despite having two coalitions in this example, we'll just say pro Pebble and against the mine, and having science available to us, great science, some of the best science in the world. Unfortunately, that science was used differently amongst coalitions, and frankly, some science were able to produce enough to inform the policy process in their favor, but some, and I would argue that that scientific assessment is shows that over the long term there will be irreparable harm to the Bristol Bay salmon fishery. So in these adversarial policy subsystems, going back to the ACF framework that Sabatier developed in the 80s, we can also see how not everybody and not all coalitions are created equal. And under this current scenario, when you have a change in precipitating events there at the top, such as a new administration, the coalitions who can come together, maybe like we saw on the COVID-19 pandemic, can actually use that precipitating event and not have joint policy-oriented learning towards the bottom of the ACF. This has been a common issue in other environmental protection campaigns around the world. When Victoria and I were in Norway 5 years ago, I listened to a lot of examples up in the Northland of issues that were happening with other natural resources and other campaigns that were forming and coalitions coming together. But what I will say is that the most important thing on the coalition to stop the proposed Pebble mine is the coalition to protect Bristol Bay has always relied on the best and strictest scientific assessments and arguments to support what that common goal is. And that common goal has never changed. That common goal is not a coalition of people and organizations and businesses who oppose mining. It's a coalition of those same actors opposing this particular mine, and not having mission creep, because that is important. Keeping that goal in mind and what the policy tool is to accomplish that goal consistent allows that coalition to move forward and continuously back up on its own arguments. And so where are we today in this coalition when science for many years was used collaboratively between coalitions, one being the government, the Obama administration, and the second being the campaign to stop Pebble mine? Where are we now after that precipitating event occurred in 2016 with the new administration? Well, it's been a different story. Unfortunately, not a lot of great news. This was on July 24th of this year. Gold versus salmon, an Alaska mine project just got a boost. The Trump administration, rejecting concerns over the risks to Alaska's fishery, cleared the way on Friday for the Pebble mine. This is not a final verdict. We are currently in a public review process of a final environmental impact statement, but this is a great example of how at one point, the coalition worked very hard to persuade the president to land in Bristol Bay and come to Alaska before his second term was up, where that next administration, under a defining precipitating event, really changed the dynamics of the two different coalitions and has reversed a lot of the great work we've done using science to bolster one side's argument, but not produce joint policy learning like we saw in the previous administration, which is really too bad. And I think this is really important for people from other Arctic nations, is to think about how this conflict could shape other future Arctic mineral development. This is an article I wrote for the Arctic Institute. It's a little old now, in 2016, but should hold some relevancy, providing more information on the Pebble mine issue, but also what is being proposed in other Arctic nations and how to maybe avoid the conflicts that we are in right now in Alaska, and see if you industries and people and indigenous people can work together on a collaborative solution and use science to inform a joint policy learning. Because I can tell you, it's very difficult to keep coalitions together. It's very expensive and it's very taxing. And the fight on Pebble mine has been over a decade, and we are still hanging over a cloud of uncertainty with a decision that could happen from an administration or from when an administration changes. And so we did not get the outcome that we sought and we were able to accomplish on the COVID-19 example before, but the coalition to stop the mine is stronger than ever. It just is under enormous headwinds of the opposing coalition and the adversarial part of the equation for proponents of the mine. So with that, Dr. Herman, I feel like I have been talking a lot. Just a couple of technical glitches. Thank you everybody for your patience. And I think from right now, I'm happy to answer more questions and go into specifics for anything that people have. I really appreciate everybody's time. I wanted to just shed light on what the Alaska seafood industry is doing to keep our workers and our people and communities safe, and to keep food on the plates during this pandemic for Americans and for people worldwide. And then also shed a little light on the proposed Pebble mine issue, show a little bit on what happens when coalitions really don't agree, and how difficult it can be on those people. And then hopefully folks can think about those examples and how coalitions are forming on COVID-19 in your country, and also how coalitions in Alaska on the Pebble mine issue might impact coalitions forming on other major natural resource issues in other Arctic nations.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brett, for a very insightful and a bit of a roller coaster of emotions of a presentation of highs and lows of coalition building around science, around health, and around safety. So we're going to move into the question and answer session. I will ask that you please either type your question in the chat, or if you can go over to the participant button at the bottom of your screen and then go to raise hand for where you are, so that I can make sure you are unmuted. And if you want to come on video, you can ask Brett a question directly. And maybe to start us off, I will ask Brett a question about when coalitions break down or when they run into barriers. So when that happens, like in Bristol Bay, are there tried and true examples of how to overcome those barriers or bring people back together when coalitions start to break down, or when you have an event change like an administration change? Or is it a throw your hands up and say, I'm not sure where to go from here? So what comes next, I guess, for Bristol Bay?
Yeah, great question. So I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you. I think the first coalition that, or the first example, I think, is when you look at how the opposition formed, it was around what the common problem was, and everybody could define that problem. If you started to think about, well, do some people believe in mining or not, to folks who maybe already had interest in mines but just oppose this particular one, it was really important for all of those actors to define specifically what that issue is. The next component is listening to science and understanding it. How can you defend your argument and define a policy vehicle to accomplish the goal of the coalition, and keeping that goal very defined? And that's what the coalition did through a right that the Environmental Protection Agency has on protecting that one resource, which doesn't actually oppose any mines or stop any mining activity. It's just like building standards. If you want to build here, here is the level of threshold that you need to meet on environmental protection. So that is ultimately kind of the very 30,000 foot vehicle that the Coalition to Protect Bristol Bay organized around and has kept consistent for a decade. It has been very consistent, and that consistency has allowed the coalition to continue on through the Obama administration, through now this first term of the Trump administration, with limited resources. You know, it's taxing, like I said, to run a coalition, and it's taxing on people. You have people that kind of come and go, and there's a necessity to re-educate folks and to spend resources. We like to say that the Bristol Bay campaign, you know, having been stalled through the Obama administration and had to kind of get restarted again, it's sort of like we were driving a Ferrari with no gas. We had all the right tools in our tool belt to kind of get the coalition back, but the resource management was so depleted by that time, and also there was so much else going on vying for those limited resources that we had to really come together. And I'm really proud of the work that that coalition has done. They are working very hard with lawmakers and in Congress right now to elevate the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to veto a particular permit for a mining operation, such as the proposed Pebble mine. But it's frankly, it's been a lot of headwinds. And so to your second question on what to do in a precipitating event, you know, to varying degrees. I feel like that in COVID sometimes, like you're you're on these webinars and you know there's that right word, but like your brain just isn't used to finding it and socializing. I'm always like, what is that word? But what has also happened is within the Trump administration, that same coalition that formed to oppose that mine has sought to find inroads within the administration on explaining the issue, but through a different lens, through really that economic development lens. And there has been some examples of success there. We were able to, after initially saying that the EPA was going to remove their authority to veto the permit, we actually worked very hard to present data and facts to Administrator Scott Pruitt of the EPA at the time to keep that ability of the EPA to protect Bristol Bay on the table, keeping that tool within their tool belt. So there has been some varying levels of success, but when two coalitions can't see eye to eye on the science, pretty difficult to have a shared common policy goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is not unique to Pebble Mine. We see that in lots of other environmental and conservation challenges where we have two different coalitions. We have another question for you about if you have been able to identify any key drivers, so roles of those involved in coalition building. Are there people that you really have to get on board, and who are those people?
Well, I don't think there's, I'm, perhaps in the academic literature for a scholar to answer that from that expertise, maybe there is that scholarly definition and the answer to that question. From my experience, I think one of the most important factors is you need to listen. If you're, let's use both actually, the pandemic and Pebble Mine, you first have to listen to the people it impacts. Number one, you have to spend the time listening and understanding what those impacts are to those people. And I think that is your foundation. And then it's to listen to the science, because I find it would be more difficult, 62% of Alaskans oppose the Pebble Mine project, and it's north of 80% in the region. So the Bristol Bay people don't want the mine. And so having that as your foundation really helps move and drive the coalition forward. That would be my number one answer. I can give a bunch of other examples. Right now in the Trump administration, I encourage folks to really approach any problems with a pro-economic development, pro-business lens. Listen to and try and understand what the business impacts may be of a development that you are either an opponent of, a proponent for. Understand what those business, jobs, and economic output arguments could be, and your coalition might be stronger. So it varies. It varies on your political climate, and you need to do a really strong landscape analysis of the political brokers and trying to understand how to support arguments, based on those decision makers.
Yeah, I think that listening and doing that landscape analysis is really important to coalitions and also most collaborative sciences. So I'm going to invite one of my co-PIs, Dr. Chad Briggs, to unmute himself and ask you a question.
Hi, Brett. Thanks so much for this discussion. With regards to the Pebble Mine, one question I had was just to give an example from the environmental impact review, that the proponents of Pebble Mine were saying that they'd come up with a historical record of rainfall related to the tailings dam potential risks, but that really ignores any future potential risks from climate change. So are there any ways that advocacy coalitions can work to sort of force acceptance of new scientific data? Or is it really just dependent upon what's institutionalized and what's acceptable by the administration?
Hmm. Great question. And good to hear from another Alaskan. You know, there are the rainfall issue is one example of many scientific assumptions that are inadequate, and you know, I'm no scientist, so take my word, leave you know, you can keep it or leave it, but there is a myriad of examples in the EIS and through the entire permitting process of the mining company failing to properly assess issues. And what they've done very smartly is, in order to advance their policy agenda, they need to make the science fit within the permitting process to advance the mine. And so on one side, you have the mining company scaling down the size, scale, and the size, scale, and scope of the mine. So scaling it from a 100-year project to a 20, and using that example to advance through the permitting process. But I mean, like, that's like putting a, you know, kid in a candy store and telling him to eat, you know, one gummy bear. The fear and the reality is, with so many other mining possibilities, Bristol Bay will turn into a mining district, and so by, you know, you basically invite all of those projects to go through the application process once you have kind of the big brother who's sort of steamrolled ahead. And is there a way for scientists to get their arguments heard more in an administration? It's been very difficult in this one, and listening to science or having science tailored for your policy agenda are very different right now. And I unfortunately just don't have a great answer for you. I can happy to maybe talk a little bit more freely offline, but you know, I have seen our scientists on that campaign work harder than ever to present their scientific arguments, using the example like you stated on rainfall, but then, you know, what happens when we have increased rainfall or increased you know, earthquake activity. I mean, there's a lot of examples, but you know, you can submit those arguments, ask for public comment, check the box, and move on. So I think really those scientific arguments need to be rooted in any legal you know, litigation that moves forward. I think that's where you can move science maybe out of the policy process if it's not going to inform that and inform the legal litigation side.
Great, thank you, Brett, for a answer to a challenging question. I'm going to now call Adam Hayes to ask his question. Adam, I've unmuted you, so you can either come on camera or just ask it in audio.
Thanks. I think I'll just ask it on audio given my current appearance. So, Brett, thanks for the talk. But I had one question around the differences between the COVID and the COVID and the Pebble Mine policy subsystems that you're discussing. So you mentioned that around the Pebble Mine, people really couldn't even see eye to eye on the science, so it's hard to come to any sort of cooperative solution. So I was wondering why you think that the Pebble Mine policy subsystem is sort of more adversarial. Like, what was the origins of that? And I mean, my own thought is that it's sort of because of the nature of the policy subsystem. So in the COVID case, the coalitions could both come together and both gain from some sort of compromise. You know, the Alaskan communities benefit from having fishing in their waters. The migrant workers obviously benefit from being able to fish. Whereas for the Pebble Mine case, it's more like zero sum, it seems like. Either the mine is sunk or it's not. And so I guess my questions are, one, do you sort of buy that that's like the main driver behind the adversarialness? And two, if it is there some sort of opportunity for mutual gain with the Pebble Mine that could translate it into more of a cooperative space?
Great question. Yeah, so, you know, remember though that, and this is maybe something I could have made more clear in the discussion, that there's sort of two coalitions happening on the Pebble Mine issue. The first is the the history of all these kind of disparate groups coming together to oppose the mine. And that's sort of, that coalition of coalitions kind of consists within the, let's call it the opponents. And then the pro, has really shifted through those precipitating events with the change in administration. And so there's originally kind of with the first coalition, science really did inform everybody to cooperate and come together and identify this one mine as the major issue that everybody can agree on. Then you have all the other kind of science informing the policy process with a new administration, and that's where things become adversarial and with the Pebble proponents. So so that's sort of kind of how those two played out is, you had on the legal side, on lawmakers' side, not seeing eye to eye with those scientific interpretations and really wanting to advance it through the policy process against the will of the people of Bristol Bay, businesses, commercial fishermen, so on and so forth. Whereas on the COVID-19 issue, you had both sides listening to the science from the stakeholder side and then from the government side, and that informed the same policy decision that everybody could agree on. So that was kind of the differences on the two examples of the collaborative approach versus what has become the adversarial approach on Pebble Mine with the change of precipitating events and the administration. I forget the second question. I kind of got off on that one a little bit. Can you repeat?
Yeah, I was just asking if there's any sort of place for some sort of mutual gain or some sort of compromise that kind of get out of this maybe zero sum of like sinking the mine or not, that could be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I'm not sure about beneficial, but I think it's been the campaign's will to, again, have those building codes for mineral development. And so, I guess if there were ever a mine to be proposed that could meet that really high threshold to not cause harm or irreparable harm to the industry, then potentially you could have both industries in Bristol Bay. But until that bar is set, it is sort of it's not a complete zero sum, because you're not saying you can't have mining, period. You're just saying if you do have it, it needs to be up here. Here's the threshold that we want. Otherwise, we just can't take the risk. It's just not worth it. So I think that's ultimately the compromise that you could say. But really on this one, it's gotten so personal and political. It has become sort of that zero sum. But to be fair, and the policy goal is not zero sum. The policy goal is just kind of building codes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Good question.
All right, we have another question in the chat. So today is the National Day of the Faroe Islands, I came across a practice of whaling. Fisheries activities in the Arctic have a commercial and traditional components. There are coalitions who oppose it, and then there are indigenous peoples and traditions. How can a balanced policy decision be made considering both?
I had to change speakers. Is that okay?
Yeah, this is good.
Can you repeat the last bit of that? I got through the most of that question on whaling and commercial fishing and indigenous users.
Yeah, so I think the core of this question is how can you come to a balanced policy decision when you have those two conflicting sides and possibly two competing coalitions over that same issue?
Yeah, it's not an issue I'm overly familiar with, so I don't want to dive in kind of unknowingly. I will just say that I think there are examples around. There are examples around in Alaska and elsewhere in the United States of having kind of traditional users of a resource kind of working together on along with kind of new users of a resource. On whaling, that one is really complex. Again, I think on a personal level, listening to, getting back to that core kind of argument on coalitions, is really listening to the needs of local people first and really elevating that. I think is going to be, I guess, most, to me, most impactful, and what I'm going to try and listen to most. And so I guess I'm a little uncomfortable getting in on specifics with whaling, and that particular example, when I'm not familiar with it to speak in depth.
Thank you, Brett. I have another question about bringing people together across different generations. So when you were building a multi-generational coalition with youth leaders and elders from a variety of communities, how do you bridge that generational divide?
Generally, well, what I really like to say, and maybe this can, maybe this is there's part of the answer of this question into the last question, when you have these kind of different coalitions, and indigenous people and their traditions trying to find that commonality. Listening to the next generation is critical. Sometimes though, being a millennial, oftentimes policymakers are older or not my generation. They're kind of talking at me and telling me what I should be listening to, rather than listening to us talk and discuss issues important to our generation. And so if you have an issue that you want to, if you want to access the next kind of generation or the younger generation, you have these gaps in generations, maybe don't start with your issue. Maybe start by talking about, something that is relevant and modern to that particular younger generation, and see if you can find those commonalities. Start talking, about equity, or other contemporary or very important issues that people are discussing, and having very honest conversations with ourselves and our friends, colleagues. I find that that's also true with a business community. You may want to talk to them about, a conservation issue, but they're a for-profit entity, and you need to respect that. You need to understand, if you want them to come into your tent, you need to understand that they may not want to talk to you about your issue. But if you can listen and frame your issue around what is important to them, maybe you'll find a better, audience. And so I think you can kind of use that example through each sort of major stakeholder that you want to put in your coalition bucket, or you want to try and access. For that generational divide, stop and listen to what that generation is wanting to discuss. It might be different than yours, but if you're, sometimes you can find those inroads through that relationship building and through talking about kind of other important topics that one generation wants to talk over another. Does that help? I'm happy to go in a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that was a good answer. And I think if we don't have any other questions, I will ask two that we got from social media this week in preparation for this webinar. So the first question we got was a question about having multiple coalitions on the same side of an issue, but that have formed separately. So can you bring together different groups that have formed campaigns for an issue, but don't necessarily cooperate with each other? So the example they gave is around an environmental policy proposal in a state. If you have multiple pro-coalitions, can you bring all of those together to work towards the same goal?
So I think one of the heart, the kind of the heart of the question is, if you have these kind of multiple coalitions all sort of tracking along the same line to accomplish a goal, you're going to really run into an issue, which maybe is where this question is stemming from, of what's the ask? What is that clear ask to a decision maker that helps accomplish your goal? And if you have kind of everybody saying, well, we want this, and everyone say, yeah, we kind of want, what they said, but actually, can you tailor it a little bit more? We want it more stringent or less. It really makes the decision maker's job difficult, and really undefined and uncertain. And so I think it is more difficult when you have different coalitions who kind of can coalesce around a common issue, but have different ideas and agendas on how to accomplish that. What I think you can maybe turn into is having different flanks. And so within a coalition, maybe an environmental coalition, as an example, you have sort of the left flank who's sort of pushing the envelope and maybe saying things that make other members of the coalition uncomfortable to say. So you're not speaking on behalf of the coalition, you're speaking half about your entity, your interests, and you kind of occupy that left flank. So you can move the policy agenda kind of that way, but then you have sort of like the radical middle, and that may be kind of another coalition member who we can all kind of coalesce around, what it is we want, but we're not quite clear on what fully we can accomplish. So why confuse policymakers that you're trying to convince? Why not try and at least define what it is you can agree on, what that minimum standard is, and everybody can get behind that minimum, and then at least that is the consistent message to a policymaker, and then you can kind of occupy different flanks within a coalition.
Great. And this other question from Instagram is kind of similar. So this person has been part of coalitions in the past that coalesce around the same policy demand, but break apart because there are differences in how, in messaging. How do you overcome differences in messaging to achieve that policy action?
Get on the same page with your communications plan right after you develop your strategic plan. Communications plan supports a strategic plan. And those are also supported by a fundraising plan. I think you need to have all three to be working together, and starting with strategic plan with coalition members, getting everybody's input, starting with kind of the local people, and then kind of broadening that out to other impacted stakeholders, and defining the road you want to travel down and the end destination, and keeping that the most consistent. And the strategy can get there, can be flexible and can pivot, but ultimately you're all going down the same place. Through there, you can have an evolving communications plan that also does not and should not be static, but it is essential that kind of people are using similar messaging, or you have kind of one flank occupying maybe a more radical messaging, but it's still something that all coalition members can be comfortable with and can understand why that those talking points and that those messages are being communicated for a certain purpose.
Great. And I think if we don't have any other questions, I will ask you one final question. So you are one of the steering committee members of this diverse research coordination network. And I wonder if you could give a shout out to why it's important to come together as a network to share knowledge, to identify and prioritize what's needed, and why we all need to work together, especially in an Arctic in motion, where you have a migratory workforce, where you have fisheries moving north. Why is it so important for everyone on this call to join our network and learn a bit more and work together towards solutions?
Well, I think, now more than ever through the COVID-19 pandemic, it's such an illustration how humanity needs to come together to solve very difficult, complex problems. And we can and should all use our expertise in working cooperatively with each other and listening to science and communicating that science towards a shared policy agenda. that I think this is really going to take everybody's hard work, and we can all pull from examples locally, nationally, and globally where people have done so. And Migrations in Harmony is a great way to help solve those problems in the Arctic. They're very complex. They're changing all the time. And we have to learn from each other and also share the expertise that we've all developed to solve some of these complex problems. That's why I'm really excited to be a steering committee member. Thank you, Victoria, for inviting me. It's really an honor. But I think what I'm most looking forward to is learning from not only the other steering committee members, but the hundreds of members that your network, our network, has started to develop. Because these are tough, whether it's COVID, seafood, or mining, shipping, climate change, migrations of people. These are really difficult problems to solve, and they can't be done alone. If we have to do it through Zoom, we're still not alone in it, but it's really going to take a huge combined effort to solve some of these problems. And this network is a great way to share resources, find connections that you might not know are out there, and see if there are any coalitions that can be formed around a common issue and a common agenda.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Despite all of us Zooming in from our respective living rooms, offices, bedrooms, we can still find connections to solve complex moving issues in the Arctic together. And I've shared in our chat window a way for you to join our free network to see resources like an interview with Brett that we have on our website, and to see future webinars. So thank you so much, Brett. If we can give Brett a virtual round of applause for an incredible presentation on coalition building. For those of you who are interested, our next webinar in the Research Coordination Network will be on August 12th, Wednesday, at this time, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 10 a.m. Alaska time, and we will be hearing and experiencing virtual reality and how we can use the devices that we already own to create virtual reality experiences that promote and create empathy with environmental issues and create a way to communicate our science in an effective way for a wide variety of audiences, from students to policymakers. So please join us and register for that webinar. We will have a recording of this webinar that will be up on our website and will be shared with you on Friday. Until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Thank you again for joining us today. Brett's email is in the chat, and I will share it with everyone in an email as well. But I hope you've enjoyed our webinar, and I hope to see you at the next one.